Okay, so I'm going to start talking about nParticles located in the effects tab for Maya. Last time I talked about creating like fog and some fluid type renders with the fluids, creating the 3D containers, which these work a little different. These work like through the process of like emitting out particles. In other words, I have a particle system set up here on this plane, and it just basically emits these like little particles that collide with each other, collide with the ground. You can control the speed, the spread from which way they're coming, different types of emitters, volume, like an omni emitter. See the way they just kind of drop off and work in infinite space down here. Now, and you can put surface shaders on these things to get different renders out. The reason why I like using the nParticles a lot is because they look really good in the Arnold Render, which I'm a big fan of. So like right now I have these set to like a blobby, which is kind of a blob. The particles kind of like mesh together to give them kind of a blob look, almost a liquid look, but a little bit solid. You can give them like a smoke look, which is why I use them for, smoke emits and just other basic like streaks. You kind of like get a rain effect going with them, self collide them on each other. And two, you can also instance particles, instance geometry to the particles. And what that is, that's if I created like a little piece of geometry over here, I can like turn every single particle into that piece of geometry and then control the emission of that. It creates a nucleus, the nParticles, an emitter, whenever you create one. And then this is obviously my collider here. And this emitter, I have an emitter here. I believe it is just a directional. Let me get to it. Stop it. Yeah, it's a directional emitter type, and it's emitting particles. The gravity is at 5, so it's going to drop to the ground, and it's colliding with itself, the particles with itself, and colliding with the plane. So, all right, so I'm just going to start a new scene. I'll just show you how to just go about creating one of these things. FX tab, nParticles, create emitter. I go to the box, and if you've messed with them before, sometimes it saves them, but I just like to reset because I did mine and I did a smoke one for mine, and it always created a smoke emitter, so I had to kind of go and reset the preferences and all that, but it should be fine. So if you go create, now you've created this emitter here, and it consists of these 3 items here, the emitter, the nParticle, and the nucleus, and each have their attribute over here. You kind of got to bounce back from each one doing certain little things, and the more you kind of get familiar with the attributes on each one, the more you kind of know what you're going for. Like with anything, if you're in the Maya standard, Maya classic, you probably need to set your timeline out a little bit longer so you can see the actual particle emitting. Now you've got this spray down here, and I'm going to move this thing up from the ground, so we'll spray out the right at the bottom. Notice the gravity on it. We've created an omni, which means basically it is kind of coming from omni all directions, maybe. The directional is kind of just a point, where now it's just one point. You can actually kind of rotate this directional how you want it to. And there's also volume. Yeah, we'll just use the directional for right now, though. It's a little bit easier to kind of hone in and control. So you notice your gravity, your speed. Let's talk about this up here. Your rate particles per second. That's basically your speed and your rate particles are what it's going to concern yourself on, how fast they're coming out and how many are emitting per second, in other words. And that's actually, how many they emit per second. So I'm going to crank this down to like maybe just 20. We can kind of see what's going on here. Speed, I'm going to turn it down a little bit so it kind of runs a little slower too. And already it's kind of like slowly kind of paced out coming. Now your nucleus is where your gravity is. Your gravity is falling at 9.8. That's the default. If you want it to shoot up, obviously you'll put the negative, or you could turn it. I'm going to make it fall a little slower, just so you can kind of see. It's not forcing itself to the ground. I can actually probably crank it down to even slower than that. Your wind direction kind of works the same way with gravity. You can kind of turn things around. Like if you were to adjust the directional of where you want it pointing at, on what axis, in other words, you can. I'm going to keep it like that because I just kind of like this falling down here. Now, one thing to kind of particle shape, let's go to the shading. It's down here in particle shape. You got your particle size. It doesn't really affect with the dots, which I want to go ahead and change it to spheres first. Your shading, here's where you kind of got your different points at. You've got spheres, sprites, streaks, blobby surfaces is what I had at the beginning. Multi-streak. The cloud is what you kind of can use as a fog, which is what I use as a fog sometimes. I'm just going to turn this to spheres right now, just so we can kind of see what's going on here and kind of rate these things out a little bit at a more timely flow. The spread is an important one because that basically controls the spread out of where they're coming at. Like instead of like a directional line, you can kind of like adjust the spread. Now we've kind of like got like a spread from one point, which doesn't look too bad there. You want, like I said, if you wanted to go back and adjust which way the emitter is emitting them out, you can. You can kind of adjust values of both sides, so it kind of comes from like one axis to another. I kind of like this just straight falling down. If you were to take your gravity completely off in the nucleus, then they're just going to basically emit from that one point. .05. There we go. So they fall, they come out, and then they fall. And my spread, since it's on there, cache it. Kind of like that right there. And like I said, the good thing about why I like particles is because if you notice, if you drop a physical light in here or something, put a plane, a ground plane in, they really look good in your Arnold Render. You can already see they're starting to look little tiny particles. So let's do some more stuff here. Let's go in here and change the color of them. Maybe even the size. Here's your color. You can actually give a ramp tool. You can go around and you can the incandescence. You can adjust like the kind of the specular levels, basically, of the particles and everything like that. That's really good for like cloud stuff. Whenever you turn them into clouds, because you can kind of like randomize the clouds or the shading of the clouds. In other words, which maybe work for this. Make it kind of white on top and then randomize how it is. I'll keep it right there. But yeah, if you want to do like rain and stuff like that, you could do streaks. Kind of like expand the size of streaks. There is multi-streak, which is a different setting. Multi-points. And Blobby Surface, which is what I had it set to begin with. Blobby Surface kind of basically changes, kind of makes them more of a blob, basically, like how I had it, like where they're kind of sticking together, if they're finding like that. and it kind of gives it an automatic shader, which you can put surface shaders on these, but if you'll notice, they'll look like that. Let's go back to spheres right now. Numeric is cool too because it actually gives the point of what particle it is coming out, the number point. Now particle size, that is in particle shape. You can control the radius, how big you want it. If you want to get them kind of like smaller. Count or lifespan. Lifespan's a big one. Lifespan's basically how long are these particles going to last? Like right now they're lasting as long as my timeline goes, but if your timeline lasts 1,000 and you want them to go 1,000, you can just, they'll be live forever. Right now, if you wanted to constant and you wanted them to last 4 seconds, they'll last 4 seconds and then die off. This is a small timeline, so I don't mind them living forever. But just know once you start creating a collider and have some sort of friction, they're just going to stay in your scene, and the more your scene rolls, the more you'll have to deal with. So that's one thing to be certain of, or to be aware of. I need to actually probably drop my emitter down some. There we go. Probably speed it up and drop the gravity down. Bring the gravity up a little bit more. There. Let's go. But let's bring the speed down. Random speed, you can have it kind of spitting out, then kind of like slowing down. It's kind of random anyway, but you know, you can kind of go fine tune adjusting that. So once you got this, what if you added let me see what the smoke looks like. The Arnold Render. Smoke, if you turn the particle size up, you start getting like a smoke coming out. Oh, I need to put a shader on it. This would have to be added like a shader in here to get it to work. Go back to spheres, turn it down a little bit. I want these things to bounce around. So say you wanted to render this out kind of like a blob, like a liquid flowing, but you wanted it kind of like how I had in the beginning, kind of like colliding on the surface. Well, it's basically the same way that you would have created a collider with the N-cloth. You just add a passive collider to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add kind of a little tray to dump them. So I am going to create the N-cloth, create passive collider. And I'm going to create a passive collider out of this floor plan too. I'm just going to back this up and see what I've got so far. So I got it rolling down and it just kind of seems to stick here. So you need to create some sort of like, if you notice with the collision with your rigid shapes, you've got this bounce. Go ahead and kind of crank that one up. That's your rigid shape 2, rigid shape 1, I'm going to crank it up. You notice they kind of bouncing a little bit. Still not what I want. So I'm going to go to my, I believe it's in the emitter. Collision, collide, self-collide. Now we probably get something. In other words, what that means is there's not kind of like mesh into each other anymore. And I'm going to crank the bounce up on these guys. Probably need to crank them up all pretty good. There we go. Now I got some bouncing. And here you can kind of go and you can kind of rate they come out. Maybe the size. Oh, no, I don't want them that much because I don't want them going all over the place. I'm going to change the shading. See what I've got in my render here. Little marbles dropping. If you were to change these to streak or something like that, it'd be like kind of the rain hitting. Line width, you gotta adjust your line width. Normal direction. That's probably to do with the direction of the emitters coming out. Oh, yep. Let me change this to Blobby Surface. Now I've got this, and we'll up the size. Now you've got this weird looking liquid pouring out. And if you want to add a shader to it, I like to do this. Find new material. Shader. And you can kind of adjust the color, what you want, like a red goo or something like that pouring out from it. So yeah, so experiment and have fun. Like I said, a lot of this kind of, I get stuck sometimes just playing with this over and over. You know, you really kind of need to know where you're going with it whenever you are attacking it, because sometimes you can get off on a rabbit's trail trying to play with different settings and, you know, basically over having fun with it, which is what, you know, the class is intended for, to have fun with it, I would think, and explore new ways of using these things with these physics. Colliders, creating colliders, you can actually create emit from objects with these, turn an object into an emitter, and I'll go over that in the next one. But in the next one I want to go over, be able to instancing, creating instancings out of these things, out of these spheres, which makes really good for, like, if you're dropping rocks or something like that, you can create rocks, randomize them. So, but the best thing to do is go up to nParticles, create the emitter, then start messing with your emitter and your nucleus, the gravity, the wind direction, stuff like that. Check around the different shading that you want to, and the rest is up to you. So, okay guys, thanks for watching.